With permission, Mr Speaker, I will update the House on the spring meetings of the International Monetary Fund and the continued action that the Government is taking to strengthen our economic and energy security in response to the conflict in the Middle East. Mr Speaker, we did not start this war, we did not join this war. But since the war in the Middle East broke out, I have been clear-eyed about my duty to be responsive to a changing world and responsible in the national interest. The best economic policy today is our diplomatic policy. Negotiation, de-escalation and the permanent reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. Last week in Washington, I held talks with world finance ministers, including the US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. I struck a joint agreement with 10 other major economies calling for a swift and lasting negotiated resolution to the conflict and agreeing to avoid unnecessary trade restrictions to support energy and food security. We agreed to maintain maximum economic pressure to ensure that Russia cannot profit from this war. And I was proud to announce the UK's third tranche of the extraordinary revenue acceleration funding for Ukraine's defences, as well as continuing to work with the US administration to increase economic pressure on Iran. The Prime Minister has also led global action, convening a summit of nations with the President of France to work together to support freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz. The UK will continue to play its part, including engagement with the insurance industry to support shipping when conditions allow. We are continuing to plan for every eventuality, but we must deal with the economic costs that are already being felt. I reject the demands for a knee-jerk response to this crisis that would put household finances at risk through higher inflation and higher interest rates. Yeah. Every choice that I make will be about keeping costs down for families and for businesses. That's why I have extended the 5p cut for fuel duty twice since the election, saving the average motorist £90 a year compared with the plans that I inherited. Yeah. It is why I have frozen prescription charges for 2 years in a row, frozen rail fares for the first time in 30 years, and why I am taking £150 off energy bills, with additional help for those struggling with the cost of heating oil. And it is why I've expanded the British Industrial Competitiveness Scheme to over 10,000 manufacturers, addressing long-term competitiveness and cutting electricity costs from this year. During the last energy shock, the previous government's package of unfunded, untargeted support saw more than a third of the direct energy bill support go to the wealthiest households. That meant higher inflation, higher interest rates, and higher taxes. I will not repeat those mistakes. Last week, the IMF said that my plan is the appropriate response to the conflict. And I led a joint statement with 10 other major economies, agreeing to coordinate our domestic responses to ensure that they are both responsive and responsible. Mr Speaker, this government has the right plan for our economy. At the spring forecast, we saw how the action that we have taken since the election has prepared Britain to better weather this conflict. Inflation was at 3% and set to fall to target, a lower base than at the outset of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, when inflation was high and rising. Borrowing was set to fall more over this Parliament than in any other in the G7. We are set to reduce the deficit by £20 billion from 5.2% to 4.3% of GDP this year. And I increased our financial buffers, with headroom against our stability room of £23.6 billion, so that we can weather shocks and keep borrowing costs down. Last week, the IMF welcomed the UK's notable improvement in our public finances. I am clear that the best way that we can build a stronger, more resilient economy is through economic growth. I welcome the recent figures showing that the economy grew by 0.5% in the 3 months to February and upgraded growth for the 3 months to January to 0.3%. I also welcome this morning's labour market figures for February, showing unemployment coming down and real wages continuing to rise as they have in every month since I became Chancellor, adding to the evidence that the government has set the right economic plan to steer our economy through the uncertainty ahead. But as I have said, the war in Iran will come at a cost. Last week, the IMF published their updated forecasts for the global economy in response to the war. They reduced their expectations for GDP growth in the United Kingdom and increased their expectations for inflation. This builds on their judgment that the UK is more exposed to energy price shocks than our counterparts, a problem that the previous government failed to address in 14 years. And on the IMF's observation that since the last energy crisis, the UK has had higher inflation than other countries, where the aftermath of Liz Truss's disastrous mini-budget and the previous government's untargeted, unfunded support package contributed to a more persistent rise in inflation and in interest rates than in other countries around the world. The IMF's forecasts are a stark reminder of why we must stick to our economic plan and go further and faster on delivering our economic security. Since the election, we have invested in clean, homegrown energy, in renewables and in nuclear power. In 2025, we imported 17% less gas than we did in 2021. And gas generation now sets the wholesale price for electricity around a third less frequently than it did in the early 2020s, meaning that our energy system is now more secure and less exposed to volatile global energy prices. Today, we are going further, with a package of changes to reduce our reliance on imported oil and gas, boost the use of renewables, and smooth the impact of energy price shocks. First, oil and gas production from the North Sea is an important and valuable resource, and its workforce is a vital asset for our country. That is why we are harnessing our domestic supply by managing existing fields for their entire lifetimes, including by allowing tiebacks for those fields to ensure that they remain viable. Today, in advance of legislation, we are publishing further details on tiebacks, which I first announced in the budget, which external analysis has predicted could result in tens of millions more barrels of oil and gas being available for UK supply. Today's announcement gives industry greater clarity to support investment in these projects and maximise supply from our existing sites to support our energy security. Second, we are sweeping away the barriers to new renewables investment, accelerating vital grid infrastructure, reforming land access rules and extending permitted development rights, as well as making more public land available for renewable infrastructure, which could unlock up to 10 gigawatts of new capacity, and helping households and businesses to switch to clean, cheaper renewable electricity through plug-in solar panels and better EV charging. And third, we are reforming our energy system. Currently, households and businesses pay more for their electricity when the price of gas is high. The electricity generator levy already recoups some of the excess returns made by generators due to high gas prices. And today I am announcing that I will extend the electricity generator levy past its scheduled conclusion in 2028. And ahead of that, I am increasing the rate of the electricity generators levy from 45% to 55%. This ensures that a larger proportion of any exceptional revenues from high gas prices are passed back to government, providing a vital revenue stream so that money is available for government to support businesses and families with the impacts of the conflict in the Middle East. But crucially, it will encourage older, low-carbon electricity generators, which supply about a third of our power, to move from market pricing to fixed-price contracts for difference. Under new proposals set out by the Energy Secretary today, that will further weaken the link between high gas prices and the price paid for our electricity. and limiting the spikes in energy prices from driving up inflation and costs for households and for businesses. Mr. Speaker, this government has the right economic plan, a plan that was right before the conflict in the Middle East started and is now essential to weather the impact of that conflict. A plan that is backed by the IMF, a plan to keep costs down for everyone and to support those who need it most. And in a world that is more uncertain, a plan to, I wish it was more certain, and in a world that is more uncertain, a plan to build a Britain that is stronger and more secure. And I commend this statement to the House.
Shall the Chancellor Sir stride?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Right Honourable Lady for advance sight of her statement. Mr. Speaker, the UK has some of the highest energy prices in the world. That is crippling our economy, pushing up the cost of living, and leaves us particularly exposed to energy shocks like the one we are experiencing right now. And yet, the government seems totally unwilling to accept the scale of the problem and totally unwilling to shift in their dogmatic commitment to a net zero agenda which is making us poorer. Last year, we on this side of the House came forward with our cheap power plan. We said the government needed to scrap carbon taxes, scrap the renewable subsidies which are pushing up bills, and reverse the nonsensical decision to rely on imported oil and gas instead of pursuing the common sense approach of extracting our own resources from right here in the North Sea. Under pressure from this Conservative opposition, we have seen some progress at least, but at a snail's pace, with the Energy Secretary dragged with oh so much reluctance in the direction we have set out. Mr. Speaker, the action taken goes nowhere near far enough and is not fast enough. At the budget, the government announced they would take 75% of the cost of renewals off bills, but they didn't abolish the subsidies as we called for. They are still being paid, maybe not out of people's energy bills, but out of the hard-working pockets of hard-working taxpayers. And when it comes to the vast majority of businesses in our country, this government has done nothing for them. Madam Deputy Speaker, the proposals announced today risk locking in the costs of those subsidies by including them in the new contracts for difference, which the government is hoping that energy producers will sign up to. So can the Chancellor confirm that this is indeed the case, that under these arrangements, these subsidies will not only persist, but will be guaranteed? The new contracts being announced today are, of course, voluntary. So on what basis does the government think these changes will lead to an overall reduction in energy bills? Presumably, Madam Deputy Speaker, generators will only sign up to these arrangements if they are in their own commercial interest. So how is the government going to ensure that companies do not simply game the system and end up being guaranteed higher prices? How much will these announcements reduce energy bills by? Has the Energy Secretary even provided the Chancellor with an estimate of the impact on bills? And if there is no estimate, Madam Deputy Speaker, how can the Chancellor be confident that bills will indeed be reduced, not increased? And on that point, Madam Deputy Speaker, we can put a number on our plan. It would mean £200 off household bills. Why can't the Chancellor do the same with this latest announcement? The government have also said they will get rid of carbon price support. That is welcome. But they are not doing it until next year. And the CPS is only part of the carbon tax, which we on this side of the House are clear needs to be scrapped completely. It costs both households and businesses, and it needs to go. Why will the Chancellor not commit to removing these taxes completely? And on taxes, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Right Honourable Lady noted the importance of keeping fuel duty down. But once again, she had nothing to say about the onerous increase in fuel duty she still plans to bring forward in September. Exactly. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, we have had no meaningful action today on the issue of North Sea oil and gas. The Chancellor says she wants to reduce our exposure to global energy, yet the government is choosing to leave us more resilient on imported hydrocarbons. We all know that she is in a completely different place to the Energy Secretary. He is committed to the gradual smothering of our oil and gas sector, regardless of the cost to our economy and the loss of those jobs and tax revenues. So why does the Chancellor not urge the Prime Minister to overrule the Energy Secretary on these matters? The revenues from new oil and gas extraction are vital given the state of our public finances. Madam Deputy Speaker, the current crisis shows how exposed we are and how damaging the government's net zero obsession has been to our economy, to households and to businesses. The government is right to want to reduce that exposure, but is doing too little, too late. We need an urgent change in course, not dither and delay. We need a proper cheap power plan to get bills back down, and we need it now.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I mean, that response exposes a shadow chancellor who is out of credible ideas. Now, I thought I was sad to read in the weekend's newspapers that once again the shadow chancellor is being lined up for the sack by the leader of the opposition. But to be honest, after his performance today, I can understand her choice. Now, the Shadow Chancellor talks about the IMF. Yes, the IMF did downgrade the forecast. Why? Because of a war that was started, which his party unquestioningly backed, and because of our high exposure to global energy markets, which his party allowed. And we are taking the right choices. We did not back this war, nor did we follow the calls of the leader of the opposition or the leader of reform to join in. And we are investing in and we are reforming our energy market so that we can take back control of our energy security. The Shadow Chancellor talks about the economy. Well, let's talk about the economy. Before this war broke out, our economy grew by 0.5% in the 3 months to February and 0.3% in the 3 months to January. Inflation was expected by the Bank of England and the OBR to return to target, and interest rates have been cut by their fastest rate in 17 years, compared to hitting 5.25% under the Conservatives, with mortgage costs going through the roof. He says it's the Bank of England's job to address inflation, but we had the same Bank of England when they were in government than when we were in government. They have cut interest rates when we have been in government because we got control of the public finances. They lost control of the public finances. Now, the Shadow Chancellor says that the response to a fossil fuel crisis is to rely more on fossil fuels and to reduce investment in clean, homegrown energy. And he is ignoring the fundamental lesson of both Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the conflict now in the Middle East. The Shadow Chancellor opposed new solar energy, opposed onshore wind power, and did not invest either in Sizewell C or in small modular reactors like this Labour government is doing. And just today, the CEO of Renewables UK has said that delinking results in reducing the link between volatile gas and electricity prices to help protect households and businesses against unpredictable fossil fuel costs, strengthening UK energy security. And on the issue of tiebacks, the Right Honourable Gentleman says it makes no difference, yet Offshore Energy UK says that developing fields as tiebacks addresses costs, lower emissions and extends the life of existing critical infrastructure, which is exactly why we are doing it. On delinking, the Shadow Chancellor says that it would lead to higher prices. Well, the exact opposite. The whole aim here is to move to fixed prices, and by increasing the electricity generators levy, which we don't know whether the party opposite support or oppose, by increasing the electricity generators levy, we incentivise those energy companies to come off the levy and come onto contracts for difference. And we are now beginning the negotiations with industry so that we can reduce that volatility in prices. And as the CEO of E.ON has said today, for too long the value in our energy system has flowed to the top of the chain. Today moves to start to turn that around, because instead of the volatility and the spikes that are so damaging both for family finances and business finances, we can take out of the system. But the Shadow Chancellor had nothing to say on that. And on fuel duty was never lower in 14 years under the Conservatives than it is today. And of course we are keeping all scenarios under review, but it is quite clear that the best way to bring down fuel prices is to de-escalate this conflict, not ramp it up like the Conservatives want to do. The Shadow Chancellor's got nothing to say on international cooperation, nothing to say on global negotiations to keep the Strait of Hormuz open, nothing to say on reform of our energy market, nothing to say on investment in our infrastructure. Why? Because he has no plan. Why? Because he doesn't have any ideas. Why? Because his party has no economic credibility. Labour has the right plan for our country. The Conservatives would take us right back to the bad days of high inflation, high interest rates and the mess they made of our economy.